Hi, I'm Nate Seberg. This is One Day Ahead. Welcome to One Day Ahead, Great Gatsby Chapter 3. This is a web series for teachers and students trying to stay a day ahead of the class. So whether the wheel fell off your car or if you're going up in a hydroplane in the morning, either way I offer the lessons I've learned having taught this book once or twice. These videos got 3 segments: a summary, highlight a character, advice for teachers. And speaking of teachers, check out my Great Gatsby unit by following the link in the thing. It gives you a larger structure to work with and will save you that time of creating those day-to-day materials. Not that teachers don't have lots of spare time on their hands, am I right? I am not. Okay then, don't forget to subscribe. Let's go to the summary. Chapter 3 kicks off with Nick running us through a typical party at his neighbor Gatsby's mansion. You get the sense that he's describing a party as seen from the outside, like he's spending a lot of time looking out of windows and creeping behind curtains. But by all accounts, the parties do sound awesome. The famous and the hip flock from New York, playing on the beach all day before cutting loose at night. Nick clearly wants to go, but he's the awkward new kid, and he hasn't actually met Gatsby. Anyway, someone must have noticed Creeper McGee here, because one day a butler shows up with an invitation from Gatsby. At the party that night, Nick shows up alone, which has got to be uncomfortable. He really gets hung up on the fact that he was invited and keeps bringing it up with everybody he meets. When he can't take this lonely awkwardness any longer, Nick turns to the sweet, sweet refuge of alcohol. I was on my way to getting roaring drunk from sheer embarrassment. We call these coping skills, but thankfully, my boy Nick does eventually find rescue when he mercifully runs into Jordan Baker. Remember her? They met in Chapter 1. She was the aloof golfer friend of Daisy. "Hello!" I roared, advancing towards her. My voice seemed unnaturally loud across the garden. Listen, Nick says he was on his way to getting roaring drunk, but when your first thought is, wow, I sound loud, you've arrived. Jordan is as cool and aloof as ever, but she does let Nick tag along throughout the night, even taking him back to meet her escort for the evening, who he describes as a persistent undergrad given to violent innuendo. That means sex jokes, and obviously under the impression that sooner or later, Jordan was going to yield him up her person to a greater or lesser degree. Ah, young love. So the talk at the party is all speculation about their host, and confusion reigns. Some thinks that Gatsby was a German spy during the war. That would be the Great War or World War I, the last war that humanity would ever have. Some think that he killed a man, and others that he was in the American army. What's interesting, however, is that all this rumor spreading about Gatsby is done on the hush. Nick has this great line: "It was testimony to the romantic speculation he inspired, that there were whispers about him from those who had found little that it was necessary to whisper about in this world." We still don't know much about Gatsby at this point, but it seems clear that he is a man of great wealth who has, for some reason, surrounded himself with freeloaders, sycophants, and party crashers, many of whom he's never actually met. Really makes you wonder why. Nick and Jordan go in search of their host, ending up in a grand library where they happen upon Owl Eyes. Great name. He's drunk and marveling at something that will take some explanation. Owl Eyes is dumbfounded by the fact that the books in Gatsby's library are real. So stay with me here. It turns out that back in the day, and right now on Amazon, you can buy fake cardboard books. It was an inexpensive way to fill out your library. They look all impressive and regal on the outside, but inside, they're empty. If you're starting to think, hey, this might be a metaphor, definitely go with that instinct. The idea is you'll have the appearance of literary well-roundedness without going to the trouble of actually acquiring all those books. The modern equivalent would be buying followers on Instagram or Twitter, which my students assure me is a thing. But Gatsby's books are real. As Owl Eyes will tell you, they have pages and everything. So far, things are looking pretty good for our boy Gatsby. He's got lots of books, and his books are books. But hold on. Having words in them is not all that Owl Eyes is stunned by. Saying Gatsby knew when to stop, too, didn't cut the pages. But what do you want? What do you expect? Again, I'm so sorry, but stay with me. In those days, publishers would print several pages on one large sheet of paper, which they would then fold up multiple times into what's called a signature. Stack multiple signatures, add some glue, a binding, and some sewing, and you've got yourself a book. The deal is, because things got all origami in that first step, a first-time reader would actually need to cut along the outer signature folds to release some individual pages. But Gatsby's pages, critically, are uncut, meaning his books are real, but he's never actually read them. Nick and Jordan return to the party, where Nick is engaged by a stranger who says he remembers meeting him in the war. They make small talk for a bit, and the stranger offers to take Nick up in his hydroplane, meaning this, not that, in the morning. Nick tells the man that he was invited, but that he hasn't met the host yet. The man is bewildered for a moment before blurting out, "I'm Gatsby." It's awkward until Gatsby turns on his smile. Nick writes, "He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it. It concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just so far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself." Or, in visual form, Nick really does like that smile. The party carries on. At some point, Jordan is plucked from the throng to have a private discussion with Gatsby. When she reemerges, she's all in a tizzy, but she won't say why. Finally, the night ends, and as Gatsby ushers them out the door, he reminds Nick of their upcoming hydroplane ride, employing his trademark phrase, "old sport." You'll notice Nick never actually agreed to go with Gatsby, but apparently Gatsby's a quick judge of character. The chapter ends with Nick talking about how he wants to date Jordan, but how it feels dishonest because of that vague relationship thing he's got going on back home. It came up in chapter 1. He brags, "Everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people that I've ever known." Which, as we know from last week, is only kind of true. And that's the summary. So each episode we dive deeper into a major theme of the chapter by exploring the inner motivations of a character, which is why this week's POI is Jordan Baker, and the theme is the evolving roles of women. Who are you, Jordan? In a lot of ways, you're like the perfect counterpoint to Daisy. She's all bubbles and giggles and flirting, and you're grounded, level, aloof, and frankly, kind of cold. Where Daisy's identity is deeply attached to her family, you remain single. A girl your age with means, looks, and in 20s high society, single. That is something new. So Daisy represents the traditional roles expected of wealthy girls of this time. She is kept, she's a socialite, a housewife, and she's both supported and ensnared by those societal roles. But that's not really you, is it, Jordan? You have some things going on that Daisy would know very little about. Let me count the ways. 1. You have a job. You golf professionally, which is awesome, by the way. That means you have money both from your family. Okay, probably, like it doesn't really say. She has one aunt and that's it, but presumably there's an inheritance here. Otherwise, I don't see how she runs with Daisy. And you have money from your golfing, meaning you're at least partially self-sufficient. 2, you cheat. Evidently, there was a rumor you once moved a ball on a golf course. And after meeting you, I totally believe it. 3, you lie. Nick writes, Jordan was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage. And given this unwillingness, I suppose she had begun to deal in subterfuges when she was very young, in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world, and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunt body. Which brings us to 4, you sex. The demands of your hard jaunt body? Wow, that is a euphemism if I've ever heard one. 5, you date. You are escorted by an undergrad who's pretty sure this is going somewhere physical. And Tom comments on you running around in chapter 1. Being formally courted isn't really your thing, is it? Number 6, you drive. Admittedly, Daisy does this too. One time. It does not go well. So, generalizing here, but in the post-World War I economic boom of the 20s, the things on this list were relatively new for women. Well, not really, like lying, cheating, having sex, holding a job, those things have been around, but a high society girl actively choosing these things unapologetically, openly, that was, socially speaking, pretty radical. The role of women was changing, and you, Jordan, you represent that change. Finally, it's worth noting that not everybody's on board with your crazy new lifestyle. There are those in the 1920 America who view the emergence of flappers like you, with your short hair and insistence on having all the same rights and opportunities as men, as a very real threat to the social fabric of society. And I know it's easy to dismiss these people as backward, small-town country folk with no real power, but I wouldn't. These are the same people who just managed to ban all the booze, and a lot of them are women. All that to say, Jordan, you seem fun. A bit selfish maybe, but independent and strong. I think I like you. But if I know you like I think I do, then I also know you couldn't care less. With love, Nate. So this book is complex. It's a thin little volume, but there's so much packed into so little that for a teacher, it can be hard to know what to aim at. That's why I'm here. Teachers, let me give you my take. So we finally get to meet the man who has lent his name to this book, but he doesn't seem that great in this chapter. He doesn't really do much, but as a class, we can't ignore his arrival. So after the entry task and the lit rolls linked to all that below, we touch on Gatsby, but only so far as to point out that the speculation around him has to be something he's intentionally fostered. Hit that, but move on. Gatsby's chapter is next episode. The real meat this chapter is Jordan Baker. While there's plenty of character mining that can happen here, it's worth pointing out between you and me, Jordan is actually not that well developed of a character. She doesn't really do much, and her flat affect and near total lack of backstory make her a place discussions go to die. So as that's the case, I always frame my discussion around her in contrast to Daisy. That way we get a clearer picture of the main female lead, who's a much more interesting and paradoxical character. So ask students to list the ways that Jordan is different from Daisy based on this chapter. They're going to get a lot, but they are going to miss the hard jaunt body reference and the fact that driving is relatively new for women in high society. The entry task for today asks students to respond to a Mark Twain quote. Those who don't read have no advantage over those who can't. After we discuss Jordan, I do some direct instruction regarding the fake books and the cutting of pages. Then we come back to the Twain quote, and they discuss the symbolism of the fact that Gatsby has real books in his library, but hasn't actually read them. And that's chapter 3. Don't forget to subscribe and to check out my unit by following the link below. Next time, we head to chapter 4, where Gatsby drives aggressively, Nick confuses a gangster for a dentist, and Daisy cries in a bathtub. All that and more next time on One Day Ahead.